Good evening and welcome to Tonight with Tim Modise. In tonight's show, we look at the moral and ethical well-being of our nation as we discuss with the leader of the Moral Regeneration Movement, Father Smangaliso Mkhatshwa. There is a general sense that the center is not holding and that the nation is coming apart. The different political and corporate scandals, the mushrooming of social problems, including abuse of children and women, have created an impression that South Africa has lost its moral compass. The widespread abuse of drugs and the spate of violent crimes are causing hopelessness amongst particularly the youth. The Moral Regeneration Movement was started 15 years ago to instill moral values among citizens and to promote social cohesion between communities. And one of the leaders and founders of the movement is Father Smangaliso Mkhatshwa, who's with me in the studio to discuss the very present and pressing problem of a nation that is seemingly in despair. And welcome, Father Mkhatshwa.
Good evening, Tim, and to our viewers, a very, very warm greeting from the Moral Regeneration Movement.
Moral Regeneration Movement, just to take a few steps back, going back to when it was founded, what was the purpose of starting such a movement? Because government was very, very much fully behind the launching of such a movement.
The purpose was that we needed a movement, not even an organization, but a movement that would promote and enhance the moral renewal of the country. Because already at that time, people had begun to realize that there were problems with the disintegration of family, but probably with young people, not because they were young, but because of the challenges that were facing them, with the whole spirit of materialism, which has actually colored the thinking, the eyes, the vision of many people, young and old. Already a question of crime, of murder, of gender violence, all those kind of social pathologies at that time. And people from the 9 provinces came together and say, we cannot fold our arms, we've got to do something about it. What are we going to do? Let us put together this vehicle we called a movement, which must be in each and every province. And since then, that has actually happened, which will involve young people, old people, workers, professional people, religious leaders, political formations, and of course public representatives and all and sundry.
But now, I will put it to you, Father, that the same issues that Moral Regeneration Movement was trying to address or was established to address have actually gotten worse over time. And that's how it feels like, at least in most recent times, that the powerful people actually themselves are subverting or have subverted the work that you are trying to do as Moral Regeneration Movement.
I suppose it will be difficult to quantify the extent to which the damage has been done, but the truth of the matter is that we are in big trouble that we cannot run away from. And perhaps for the interest of for the information of the viewers, in as early as 1998, the NEC of the African National Congress issued an official statement called Ethical Transformation, a statement of the moral renewal of the nation. They made a commitment to try as much as possible to take seriously the call by Nelson Mandela when he called for the moral, for the RDP of the soul. And even in 1999, I remember very clearly, he made a statement in Parliament. And this is what he said. He said, the values of human solidarity that once drove our quest for a free society have been replaced by crass materialism and goals of instant gratification. That obviously has led to corruption, has led to greed, has led to all kinds of social ills that are facing us today. And the fact that we assumed power in 1994, for the first time, we were in charge of resources. what it was a very good thing, because it gave us an opportunity as a newly liberated people to enhance development among our people, to improve the lives of everybody else. But it also created a new monster: access to resources, access to power, access to chronism, access to do all the sort of problems that we are facing today. And from that point of view, I think to some extent I would agree with you that we seem to be facing a huge problem. And if I can just tell you a very short story.
Yeah.
In 1996, when I was Deputy Minister of Education, I was in Nigeria visiting some friends of mine and so on. And they congratulated us for our freedom. And they said South Africa is making us very proud. However, he said to me, let me warn you, Mkhatshwa, you'll really hold my hands one day. He says, one day, don't be so proud and arrogant about your freedom. He says, one day you'll be as rotten as we are ourselves today. You'll be like lots of other African countries that unfortunately have betrayed the hopes and aspirations of their own people. So we're not as rotten as all that, I would say, but we are very much in that direction.
I actually am taken aback. In the late 90s, one of the commentators and political analysts said more or less the same to me. He said, you've got an optimistic view of South Africa, but let me assure you, in due time, within a short time, you're going to see the true colors of power and privilege and what those things do to individuals that you know very well. And it's been very sad to say what his predictions were have been confirmed. But be that as it may, let's come back to our societies and our communities and individuals in our society, that when they look at powerful people that they look up to, all right, and take to materialism in the manner that you've just explained, and do not want to be held accountable, they then lose hope and commitment, I would argue, to the very moral values that moral regeneration espouses, isn't it? And, and of course, what makes it difficult is that if you do not have access to opportunity for education, for a job, so you can look after your own family and your own people, then you look for the shortcut, isn't it?
The reality is that many people look up to their leaders, whether it's in the church, whether it's in state, political leaders, or whether people who have responsibilities in society and so on, because they think that they represent what is in the best interest of the nation as a whole.
Yes.
The truth, integrity, honesty, the defense of the common good for all. They represent that which is good and worthy for the nation, as a whole. So there's a way in which, as a leadership, we can betray the best interests and the most noble aspirations of people. Not that people should only just look at leadership and then say they have no brains of their own, they have no hearts of their own. That is not true. But the truth of the matter is that these are people who have got power to dispense also resources, to make resources available either to society as a whole, or to their families, or to their cronies, or to their special friends in a way that is very biased. I've met young people who were at schools, maybe even with some of our political leaders, and they suddenly see them driving around in expensive vehicles, very expensive houses, and sometimes more vehicles than they actually need. They drink the best drinks in the world, the best dress, the best watches, the best seat, everything. And some of them have asked me, but so-and-so and I were classmates, and that guy was not even very smart in class, and suddenly today, he is almost a little god, as it were. I'm just repeating what they said. And I'm almost like a beggar. And he says, I don't envy his success, but the problem is that some of them today, when I visit them in their offices, they make it very difficult for me even to meet with them. And they've created a gap between themselves as the ruling elite, with the ordinary people on the ground.
And
so
of course, that poses a serious threat to society.
Well, it does.
And it leads to the breakdown of communities as well, isn't it?
Indeed.
Now, when we look at, let's be specific about the problems, right?
Yes.
We now have 16 days of activism against the abuse of
Yes.
women and children, but every year we don't see a difference to the extent of that, as an example, right? And then you think of what goes on in the townships in and around Tshwane, for instance. Nyaupe is a relatively new phenomenon, but it has spread so wildly now, affecting so many young people and their families. The jobs they need are not being created. The inequalities are growing, and the access to educational opportunities are diminishing. What do we do, and how do we allow, or how did we allow this situation to arise in the first place?
The mistake we made was that in the either appointment or election of our leadership, especially those in key positions, that I think we allowed ourselves to be hoodwinked, and we allowed ourselves simply to take the messages that were dished out to us for purpose of winning an election without really being critical about it. So in other words, what we're looking for is ethical leadership. And I've always said to people, when we're talking about morality or ethics, we're not really talking about someone who's saintly or someone who is as close to God as possible. Of course, that would be an advantage. But we're just looking for someone who represents the aspirations of people, someone who is honest, whose word you can trust, someone who says, listen, we, either as this government or as this department, we're going to do the following things in the next 5 years, who will come back to us and say, listen, the commitment remains, but for these reasons, we are unable to fulfill that. So it's someone whose word you can trust, but also someone who lives by example. Someone who is not going to say, although I don't really need 6 cars, but I'm going to buy 6 cars, the most expensive, so that people can see I've got power, I'm in charge, I'm very important, and my word is law, because that's the danger of not knowing how to handle power. Power is a good thing, we need it.
But here's the point, Father Mkhatshwa. In recent times, we've seen the courts become the arbiters of what should happen in our society, and having to hold those who are the representatives of the people, elected by the people, accountable, because they themselves do not hold each other accountable. What's your view about that? And then the same people complain that the courts are overreaching, they should stick in their corner and should not interfere in how the political system works.
To the best of my knowledge, the courts have not done anything that is outside the scope of their own responsibilities and so on. The talk about overreach, I think it's far-fetched, quite honestly, because one, they've respected the power relations between the 3 spheres of government and so on. But the truth of the matter is that if the legislature fails or does not carry out its function adequately, if the executive does not actually carry out its duties sufficiently, and the legislature fails to call them into account, there comes a point when people will say, I have tried this and that and it has failed, but there is still one opportunity. Take this to the courts. I think all what the courts are doing now, in fact, need to be commended, need to be defended at all costs, and need to be supported, because they are helping to save our democracy and our constitution.
Father Smangaliso Mkhatshwa of the Moral Regeneration Movement is our guest tonight, and in a short while we'll be looking at the social institutions and their role in promoting moral and ethical values, business, community organizations, and individuals. We'll continue our conversation in a moment. Well, we're focusing on the dearth of moral and ethical leadership in our society and how this is affecting our communities negatively, as well as killing the dreams of many young South Africans. The leader of the Moral Regeneration movement is Father Smangaliso Mkhatshwa, who's with me in the studio. Father Mkhatshwa, let's continue a little bit, and I want to go a bit after, if I may put it that way, after your sector.
Yes.
And that's the religious sector. Yes. You know, we've seen the mushrooming of fly-by-night churches with all sorts of strange things happening there, that impoverished people expected to pay huge amounts of money for lifestyles of the so-called pastors, and being made to do strange things that undermine even their own personal dignities. I'm talking about the individuals who attend such churches. What goes through your mind when you see these things all over the place?
Churches in particular, including other religious organizations, played a very significant role during the struggle against apartheid. Many people have looked up to them for moral guidance, for support, and that was expressed in their, for instance, supporting people that were in exile, people that were arrested and charged with vague offenses and so forth. So they expected that kind of culture to continue, especially within the family or the ecumenical movement. But what has since happened, unfortunately, is that there's just been a mushrooming of churches. Practically every month there's a new church that crops up. As someone puts it, he says, you know, I used to think that God is omniscient, he knows everything. But I've come to realize that the one thing he does not know is the number of churches in South Africa. He says that. Yeah. But all right, there's no harm in so many churches.
It's actually a growth sector.
Well, it is, but we have to look at the consequences of some of the negative things that they are doing. One, I would say they've been captured by the spirit of materialism. That has become the thing. Acquire money, acquire physical resources, fame, power for themselves, and so on, and all these sort of things and so on. And from that point of view, what has now happened is that being the light, being the model of how people should behave themselves in a manner that obviously enhances their spirituality, which is true, and that which has to be expressed in different ways. People are now seeing them more or less as not very much different from a business. They're doing business, and they are invested in commercialization of religions. In a way, they've almost tarnished, if one can put it that way, the image of what it means to be church, what it means even to be a believer. The good news, though, is that you still have a remnant, as it happened even in the Old Testament, that in the midst of the rot, you always have the remnant. And even in South Africa, there are still some church, religious organizations, including others that may not be Christian, that I think continue to witness to what the church ought to stand for as a contributor to the RDP of the soul.
Now, staying with the RDP of the soul, for those who are relatively educated, who've got jobs, and who can look after themselves, right? Normally better off people,
yes,
can cope, can do relatively well without the support or intervention of the public sector to a substantial extent. But the marginalized, impoverished people are very vulnerable.
They are.
Whether it be to the withdrawal of public services, to the influence of the churches that we have spoken about. Now, what interventions do you think should be put in place, at least from the Moral Regeneration movement point of view, to alleviate this and give people hope? Because, you know, once you lose hope and you're going through the difficulties that we've just mentioned, then, you know, it can only get worse if there are no interventions.
Now, in 1998, or rather, 2008, we published this booklet. It's called the Charter of Positive Values.
Yes.
It's a list of the kind of values which are shared should be shared by all members of the of society. When you go through these values, the one thing that is noticeable, they're not really talking about afterlife, God, or and so on and so on. They're talking about the real life. They're talking about economic development, what they call improved material well-being and economic justice. That's what they are talking about. They're talking about the enhancements of sound family and community values, about respect for human dignity. They're talking about culture, belief, conscience, even the preservation of the environment. So what we're therefore saying is that if as many people as possible, either individually or through their organization, could actually not only subscribe to this in terms of making themselves aware of the existence of these values, but begin to embark on active programs to try and promote this, implement this to the best of their ability, I think would make a huge difference in our society, because this would give them hope. It would give them also something to do. You are quite right in saying that people that are wealthy and so on, they can always look after themselves, but people that are poor, they are victim to crime, to drug abuse. They are victim to exploitation, to social inequalities. They are victims to a poor education, as we see today, that the kids in grade 4 cannot actually make meaning out of what they read. And the consequences of that are long-term and dire, which therefore means that while it's all very well to talk about free higher education, but if the foundation is wobbly and very weak, you have a problem on your hands. And people with poor education, their chances, their future opportunities are not as great as they should be. And that's one weapon that Mandela emphasized, education.
Father Mkhatshwa, because of the experiences that people have at a personal level in their own neighborhoods, at a public level, at the workplace, in the broader societal context, I get a sense that there's a bit of despondency and hopelessness building up. What must we do as citizens looking forward to a better future, looking ahead to 2018? What is there that we can do for ourselves to improve our condition?
The one mistake that we must never make is just to look up to government as a provider of everything, even though, of course, we've voted people into power to help access resources, to distribute those resources fairly and equitably and so on. So, but what we must do ourselves, in our small communities, in our organizations, in our institutions, we should try and embark on those initiatives that help to improve our own lives, with the hope that as we do so, we can then stretch out a hand to the government or departments and say, this is what we are doing ourselves. Can you please also meet us halfway? Something like that. Now that will do two things. One, it will actually help to improve our material being, even if in a small way. It will bring about the kind of solidarity that used to exist, especially in African culture and so on, where a neighbor is not only the person next door, but is your relatives, your ancestors, all these people and so on. But thirdly, what it will also do, it will give people a kind of a moral a boost, so that they do not become easy prey to people like some of these phony churches and apostles and people like that and so on, who make them do very funny things, because people believe them. That if they say, if you do this, you drink this water, you eat that, you smell that, actually you might be a millionaire the next one.
All right. Well, where can, very briefly, people go to access the materials of Moral Regeneration Movement? Is there anywhere where they can find this pamphlet and other materials?
Obviously we have a footprint in all the 9 provinces. That's the one thing that we have done. A study was conducted, I think, about 3-4 years ago by an independent company.
Yeah.
And they went around the country, they interviewed different categories of people and so on. What they came out was that MRM is known in all these provinces. But what is obviously is lacking, what needs to be done, is to become better resourced.
Yeah.
Resource in the sense not only just money, but obviously we need that as well in order to acquire certain tools and things that we need in order to carry out our responsibility.
Well, we will support you in spreading the message anyway as you
Please,
build the capacity
yes.
to do the work that
We
you've been
appreciate
established
that.
to do. But the key message tonight is that your dignity is your responsibility, and together with friends, neighbors, members of family, you can build yourself into a stronger person and build stronger communities. And of course, we must not forget, let's hold our representatives accountable and then expect moral and ethical conduct from their side as they discharge their responsibilities. Father Smangaliso Mkhatshwa, thank you very much for having been our guest.
Thank you very much, Soweto TV. We appreciate your assistance and we look forward to greater cooperation.
From us, good night to you.